5 more bad cards that broke Hearthstone. First on our list of cards that went from terrible to really, really good overnight is Shadow Boxer, which is actually, I think, the perfect example of a card that did this. Shadow Boxer came out in the Goblins vs. Gnomes set. It sat useless in your collection for years, until one day, the lifesteal mechanic got printed. An early example of this breaking was Priest using Shadow Boxer in combination with Unidentified Elixir. What Identified Elixir was it was give a minion +2/+2, this was a 3-mana spell, give a minion +2/+2, gain a bonus effect in your hand. So you had to basically draw Unidentified Elixir and hope and pray that it became the Elixir of Life, which when transformed into your hand became a red potion and said give a minion +2/+2 and lifesteal. You'd then make sure that your hero was low life and you'd heal your face. That was it. By having a Shadow Boxer in play with lifesteal and healing your face, it would then notice that you were healed, deal 1 damage to a random enemy, which would then heal you because the Shadow Boxer had lifesteal, which would then trigger Shadow Boxer again, realizing that you have healed, dealing 1 damage to a random enemy, and that would repeat, dealing 1 damage and healing you for 1 until you were up to full health. So as long as you got your health low enough, you could deal up to 78 damage, I think, with 2 Shadow Boxers. And it's only a 3-card combo. It's like Shadow Boxer plus Elixir of Life plus another Shadow Boxer, or a potion or a power word shield or something to just get you a little bit of extra damage if you're in fatigue. Like, you can use other cards, but all it needed was Shadow Boxer and a lifesteal. It was that crazy. It was that simple, and it's the perfect example. There is no better example than a card that's just there. Like, historically, it's a River Crocodilus that when you heal your face would ping a random enemy. That was the card, and then it would like probably die. But now, all of a sudden, with the lifesteal mechanic, there's OTK potential overnight for this card. Ultimately, this was too strong for the game. Blizzard didn't love that this ancient card just came out of nowhere and broke Hearthstone, so they eventually nerfed it to when a minion was healed instead of when a character is healed, so you could no longer use the combination of just a simple lifesteal effect plus Shadow Boxer and then healing your face to trigger infinitely. You'd have to heal minions, which effectively killed the card. Up next on our list, we have a card that didn't necessarily go from 0 to hero overnight, but slowly over time went from being a card that did a powerful thing and had a big drawback in order to do the powerful thing, and it slowly shifted to being a card that did a powerful thing and another powerful thing. The card I'm talking about here is Naturalize. When Naturalize first came out, believe it or not, it was really, really bad. Being able to kill an opponent's minion for 1 mana is great, but giving them 2 cards in early Hearthstone was really, really bad because draw across the game wasn't very accessible, and you weren't able to really get far enough ahead and snowball using a card like Naturalize, so it kind of just sat dormant in a class that was really desperate for removal for a lot of years. However, over the years, as Druid got more and more tools and got more and more stronger, and specifically began being designed for mill strategies, specifically strategies where you decide to outlast your opponent in one way or another by sending them into fatigue, whether it be making bigger green men or making them draw more cards in the later versions or anywhere in between. Eventually, this card became 1 mana destroy anything, destroy any minion your opponent plays, and burn a couple of their cards. And while burning cards is generally very overrated in terms of its actual impact, it's still a huge deal when what used to be an extremely negative side effect of a card becomes a positive in any light. Naturalize now, I think by a lot of people, is viewed as a very good card and potentially maybe even a very frustrating card, because while burning cards isn't actually that good, like from like a winning the game standpoint, the reason people talk about it and get aggravated by it so much because it doesn't feel good to lose your cards. It feels like it should be like weak, whereas in reality it's basically just sending those cards to the bottom of your deck most games where you don't draw every card. But now you're losing your minion that you spent a lot of mana on or worked really hard to make for only 1 mana, and you're dealing with hand size issues because the druid is either making you draw a bunch of cards or is just vibing with a bajillion armor while you try to do anything you can to win, while you then eventually just die in fatigue. So a great card in my mind that was a bad card that eventually broke Hearthstone, but it kind of was a slow burn. It slowly got better and better over time and is now just like really quite good in basically any deck that it makes any sort of sense in. It's kind of one of those cards where the only thing that stopped it from continuing to still be good right now is actually that there's just like not really like board mattering in Wild, so like you just don't even really need it. But it used to be like a laughing stock of the druid class, and it eventually became a very strong, very powerful, and kind of tough to play against card. Next up, we have another legacy card. Much like Naturalize, this is a card that when it first came out was just really bad. It kind of showed glimpses of what it could do, right? Holy Wrath potentially could say draw a Molten Giant, deal 20 damage to the opponent's face. That's a phenomenal card. If I could play a 5-mana deal 20 damage to the opponent's face, plus draw a card, 5-mana spell, deal 20 damage to the opponent's face, draw a card, I'd play that card. I'd play 2 of that card. I would do everything I could to play 3 or 4 or 5 of that card. That's a phenomenal card. But like, you had no way to really make it consistently do anything of note. So most of the time it was a 5-mana deal 3 damage, draw a card, which was just a worse version of a card that already existed. Sometimes it was like deal 6 or 7, which was good enough, but sometimes it was deal 1 or 2 or 0. Like, it was just really bad. The card was just terrible. Eventually though, cards like Lorekeeper Polcult and Order in the Court got printed. Suddenly, Hearthstone, you know, at this point, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, they've started to use and create cards that manipulate your deck as if it were a physical stack of cards, whether that be the dredge mechanic, whether that be placing cards on the top, looking at cards on the bottom, whether it be shuffling the deck. They've really gotten creative with ways that they've interacted with it as if it was a real physical deck. And one of those ways was Lorekeeper Polcult and eventually Order in the Court, which, imagining this in like a physical card game is hilarious. Like, you just look at every single card in your entire deck, put them in order of like highest cost, kind of crazy. Suddenly, you could play one of those 2 cards, and you could then play Holy Wrath, dealing 25 or 20 damage to the opponent's face, guaranteed. You know what the top of your card is. You know what the top of your deck is, rather. Eventually, even more so to make this card even better than when it was, you know, being used with Shivala and Lorekeeper Polcult. When Order in the Court came out, not only could you do this effect for cheaper, and you could even use Order in the Court plus Holy Wrath in the same turn, but they eventually even buffed Order in the Court. They nerfed Order in the Court, I mean, and they made it so that you no longer draw a card when you play Order in the Court, you just shuffle your deck. This was a nerf for all the standard decks that ran Order in the Court, but for Holy Wrath, a card that had since been plagued to the abyss of Wild, this was actually a buff, because now you are way more often likely to have not drawn all of your high expensive minions, and you were able to guarantee 1 and often 2 way more often to still be able to hit a huge minion and thus do huge damage to your opponent's face. This, to me, a great example of a card that belongs on this list. It's a very fun card. It was just kind of a meme, and now it has like a real playable place. It's one of those cards that it did its time in the pack filler jail, and now it has some cool ways to be used to actually medium success. And at its peaks, extremely good success. Which is why Holy Wrath is a card that I've put on here as a bad card that broke Hearthstone. Invitation Courier. This 4th card on our list is a bit different than the rest. Those were all super ancient cards that sat around for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. This card kind of only sat around for like 1 year? I don't know the exact dates, but this was a card that was in the newer sets, but nobody really knew existed because it was just horribly unplayably and just horribly untouchable. Shout out to all the arena homies who are rocking with this card since day 1. But for the rest of us that weren't rocking with this card, what it does is after a card is added to your hand from another class while this minion is in play, copy it. So if you play a card that's like from a different class, you get a copy of it added to your hand, and then the card you play obviously plays. What broke these cards was the fairly new mechanic in Hearthstone from Perils in Paradise, the drink cards. What the drink cards do, they're essentially like twin spell, but they're like tri-spell, where you play a card such as Chalice, which reads deal 2 damage randomly split among all enemies, 3 drinks left. So this card on its own is 1 mana deal 2, which adds a 1 mana card that does the same thing, and then when you play the second copy, it adds a card again. So you have 3 copies of a 1 mana card all in one card that all say deal 2 damage randomly split among all enemies. However, with Courier, suddenly you play the first one, which has 3 drinks left, you get a copy of it. You also still have the one that does 2 drinks left, and you can then play the one that has 3 drinks left and get one that has 2 drinks left and one that is 2 drinks left, and you just basically have infinite damage. I don't know if it's actually infinite. I feel like eventually you have to run out of cards. But basically, instead of 3 copies or 6 copies if you do both of your Seabreeze Chalices, you would have just like a bajillion copies, which was kind of cool. And because of the tourist mechanic in Perils in Paradise, you could actually play this mage card in your druid deck. So you'd be able to play cards like Guff or New Heights, you know, ramp up, draw cards, play Invitation Courier, make your cards from another class cost 1 less, with our good friend here, and then play 0 mana Seabreeze Chalices that generate another one on their own, but then also copy from the Courier. And suddenly, what is only a few damage becomes a bajillion damage, and you suddenly have Machine Gun Druid. This isn't like the most powerful thing in the world, I suppose, but it's certainly one of those situations that I think is really perfect for this list, where a card went from just like, unless you play Arena, you don't know it exists, to, oh my, that's a real card? Wow, that's really strong. Oh wow. How does he still have a Seabreeze Chalice in his hand? How is he still playing them? What is going on? For me, not kidding, the first time I ever saw this card, despite it being an Athria card, was the first time I saw this deck. It was that, like, for me, just 0 to hero overnight. Very hilarious. I mean, this card had basically rotated by the time, it had rotated, I think, by the time that I knew it existed. And suddenly, it was, like, really, really good. So, way to go, Invitation Courier. Way to be invited to the party. Welcome to Hearthstone. Glad to have you. Maybe I'm not. I don't know. Yeah, I'm glad to have you. Hop on in, buddy. Welcome to the tavern. Excuse me as I troll a little bit here, but our 5th and final card on this list for bad cards that broke Hearthstone is Maxima Blastenheimer. For those who don't know, Maxima Blastenheimer came out in the Madness of the Darkmoon Fair set. And if you never really played this card, I wouldn't blame you. What it is a 6-mana 4/4 minion that says Battle Cry. Summon a minion from your deck. It attacks the enemy hero, then dies. So you're what, like pulling out a Boulder Fist Ogre, dealing 6 damage to the opponent's face, and removing Boulder Fist Ogre from your deck? Like, is that a good card even when it hits a big minion like that? No, not really. It's just kind of awful. Just kind of bad. And the reason I'm trolling by putting this on here, because it is objectively a bad card that broke Hearthstone. But why I'm having a little laugh here is because the reason this card broke Hearthstone wasn't that something came along and synergized with it really well that made this card good. Like, there's no death rattle on the planet that makes this card good. There's no minion with enough attack in the game that's supposed to be there that makes this card good enough. However, if the game were to say break kind of on its own, and Maxima Blastenheimer were there to kind of, you know, take advantage, then perhaps maybe there is a card with enough attack to make Blastenheimer good. What I'm referring to here is, of course, the infamous Maxima Blastenheimer Cthulhu bug. The way this worked, hilarious. You would play a Beckoner of Evil, some card that buffed your Cthulhu that happened to be the cheapest, so it's what people used. You then make your Cthulhu an 8/8. You then play Maxima Blastenheimer, drawing your 8 attack, 8 health Cthulhu, and throwing it at the opponent's face, which of course dealt 8 damage to their face. Except it didn't do that at all. It actually dealt 128 damage to their face. And it did it in epic fashion too. Watch as this Cthulhu grows from an 8/8 doing 128 and hits the opponent in the face. Is this the most infamous wild bug? I think it's gotta be. It was hilarious. Probably not even that good, but certainly a bad card. Albeit taking advantage of a bug, but a bad card that went from nothing to breaking Hearthstone rather quickly. And oh my goodness, this is so funny. It's literally what you're watching is that simple. You only have to buff your Cthulhu a single time. You then play Maxima Blastenheimer, but instead of throwing an 8/8 Cthulhu at your opponent's face, it throws an 128 Cthulhu at the opponent's face. For spaghetti reasons? I don't know. I have no idea why. It just grows. Something causes it to grow a bunch. It just pew, 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 all the numbers grow. And that's it. That's the whole deck. It was a bug. But as a result of the bug, Maxima Blastenheimer went from a bad card to a card that broke Hearthstone. And for anyone who's ever worried about abusing bugs while playing the game, you shouldn't, because the game developer at the time, Mixar, a very big name in the Hearthstone community even still, played this deck on Wild Ladder, joked about it on Twitter. He has no shame, and neither should you. Play the game as it is presented to you. That's all we can really do. Play the broken decks if you want to play the broken decks. Play the actual bugged decks, not just the overpowered decks if you want to play the overpowered decks. Play your fun homebrews if you want. Just play Hearthstone and have fun. It is not your, like, responsibility to not play decks that hurt your opponents and make them not have fun. That is on the designers to fix that for you. Just play what you want as the game is presented to you. But anyway, enough ranting aside, that is the final card on our list of bad cards that broke Hearthstone. I'll see you in the next one. Don't forget to subscribe, and thanks for watching.